important bills being looked at over the last decade. Good evening, Mr. Rosenthal. Welcome to Vuma FM. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. Hi there.
I'm all right, thanks. So why is this the most important bill, as you say, that is being looked at over the last decade?
Well, I think it's the biggest change in education in our generation. The last big change in education was the 1996 Schools Act, and this would very radically change many different aspects of education. And particularly what we're concerned about is that it's taking powers away from parents and giving them to the central government. And we believe that the 96 Schools Act was good, and that the powers should stay with the parents.
These additions now, pertaining, of course, to the powers you're saying are being taken from parents, what does it say, and what's your interpretation of it that makes you say you don't accept it in its current form, particularly in relation to homeschooling, which I believe, of course, as far as your presentation was concerned to the committee, was of grave concern to you?
Yes, look, I think that the bill would introduce a whole lot of additional regulations for homeschoolers that would make it more difficult and more expensive. But I'm encouraged by the fact that the government has listened to some of the concerns that were voiced by parents, and so, for example, has agreed that assessments will only take place once a phase for homeschooling. The home site visit will not be required, which is a privacy benefit, and there's more flexibility for using other curriculums. I think that the homeschoolers themselves are wanting a retention of their current freedoms and don't want any further state interference. That's why they're homeschooling. But I think that it's also the case that this particular bill it kind of sets the ground rules for all the other disputes which are likely to happen in future. And we believe that there's many people in the Department of Education who would like to grab more power away from parents and make things more difficult to do anything except the state curriculum, and preferably in a state school. And we want to have as much choice and as much flexibility as possible for parents to do things the way that they want to do, because that allows more religious freedom, which is very important to us. But I think it's also very much affecting the schools, because the powers of the school governing bodies would be reduced on admissions. They would be reduced on language and on code of conduct. And for both homeschooling and for the schools, there's a threat of a jail time of up to a year for parents who don't comply. Now, we're arguing that there shouldn't be any jail time for parents who decide to keep their own children at home for one reason or another. If they're fair enough to allow jail time for people who interfere with other people's children, but we don't think it's appropriate for parents to be sent to jail. I don't think it's going to help anything then. Another concern is just in terms of abortion, that the government has a really nasty policy on what they call learner pregnancy, which encourages teachers to refer children for abortion without notifying their parents, and to organizations which promote abortion and immoral sex education. And this Clause 41 of the BELA bill would allow them to turn that policy into law, which means that it would have to be complied with, not just could be complied with. We're very opposed to that learner pregnancy policy, and we definitely don't want to turn into regulations, because then that's going to be unacceptable.
Now, the government, particularly the Department of Basic Education, had moved previously to issue a statement to that extent, saying that there is sensationalization by the media when it comes to the clause pertaining to the sale and or regulation of alcohol at schools. Someone would say, of course, I mean, it makes sense that there are organizations and churches and church halls or school halls that have been used as venues and so forth. And therefore, when there's alcohol involved in a school building being used then as a venue, that there has to be laws and regulation on how that's going to happen. Why do you have a bone to pick with that part of the law?
Well, look, the thing is that actually the BELA bill has changed since since we discussed the matter previously. But the previous initially they were the proposal was to allow alcohol in schools under certain conditions. In September, they took out that part of the bill that would allow alcohol in schools. They just said to rather have no alcohol in schools. And I think that the dilemma there is that in some perhaps more wealthy schools, there is not such a problem with alcohol in the community, but in other areas in the country, there is an enormous problem with alcohol, and that the opinion of many of the people was that it was just going to be too complicated to allow alcohol in schools, and it was easier just to say no alcohol in any school. Although there might have been special arguments why it could allow it in some schools, but it was just decided that it was going to be easier to administer, and I'm quite happy with that decision. I think it's quite reasonable, and that was a case of Parliament listening to the concerns that people raised.
As far as concerns that people raised were concerned, there are many of those who did presentations to the committee that were complaining that on that part that is pertaining to the parental authority to be able to do homeschooling, it would seem that, as the Democratic Alliance as well had said, that the committee did not listen to those who were making submissions in relation to educating their own children at home. What were your thoughts and perhaps observations as these presentations were being made, and how the committee received them?
Well, one of the things that really concerned me was that, which I feel still actually needs to be challenged in court, is that the government put together there was tens of thousands of submissions, and the parliamentary staff put together a summary for the parliamentarians to read. But that summary only came the night before the meeting at which they were supposed to deliberate and make decisions on it, which gave them absolutely no time to read it. And the opposition parties, all of them, the Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front, and the ACDP, all protested very strongly that had not been reasonable. And I think later sent a letter to the Speaker to protest that was out of order. But I think they were basically wanting to try and hurry up and finish this bill so that it could get through before the next election. But that was really bad in terms of due process. And although they did a lot of public participation, they ignored many of the concerns that were raised, and they didn't really get a chance to read it the night before, the summary. So I think that is really unacceptable. But the good news is that the bill still needs to go to the National Council of Provinces, and they will also do public participation, and so we can have a second chance to have our say there.
How important is it for parents to ensure they have a say as well in the last 2 minutes of the public participation now round coming from the NCOP?
I think it's essential that we do speak up and that we also lobby our provincial governments. This is the powers of the school governing bodies and the powers of homeschooling parents are the powers that are going to decide every other small issue that comes to schools. And for example, there's 2 schools in the Western Cape that are currently being sued by some transgender activists who would like girl to be allowed into the boys' toilets and for a girl to swim topless. To me, this is ridiculous. The school governing bodies, on behalf of parents, should be making those sorts of decisions. We don't want the state or the courts interfering with their powers. And it's their children, it's not the state's children. And I think that parents need to speak up and say, leave our children alone. But the good news is that as compared with the 2017 BELA bill, the government has listened to more than half of our concerns that we raised, because the 2017 bill was an absolutely ridiculously draconian bill, and that has improved this, and we're hoping that they will continue to listen to us and we can fix some of these other problems, such as admissions, language policy, the code of conduct, this clause affecting abortion. And this also, I think that there's certain things in the bill which they just haven't thought about too much, which is that the law on leases can affect all of the churches that are leasing school halls at the moment and give them less security, because they could only have a lease agreement for a maximum of 1 year. And we argue that this will be more fair. And so I think parents have to fight every step of the way, and we have been fighting this thing since the 1990s, and particularly Kader Artspel's 2003 religion and education policy. We fought against the 2017 religion in education, religion in schools case, and there will be many more battles in the future, but each battle builds on the one that happened before that.
Mr. Rosenthal, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Ed.
Besikhuluma ke la nenye group of those that